We mean you no harm, from The Cracker Queen by Lauretta Hannon. Mama's half-sister Linnell was born with a veil, a membrane that surrounds the fetus and occasionally covers the head at birth. It is said that those born with the veil have second sight. Sure enough, Linnell sees horrendous things before they happen, and folks seek her help in discerning their dreams. When she joined us for a day of ghost hunting, I knew she'd intensify the whole endeavor. My then 19-year-old nephew, Dusty, had been telling me about the haunted locations around Dublin and wanted me to come visit and go looking for spirits with him. I desperately needed a break from Metro Atlanta anyway, and this was not the kind of adventure I'd ever find in the big city. His tales were a bit fantastic. Stories about everything from a dilapidated funeral home that shook to one about being chased by a hobgoblin that threw marbles at him. I didn't actually expect any encounters with spectral beings, especially during the daylight hours. I figured we'd have a fun time and that Linnell would lend harmless occult drama to the proceedings. Wrong. Our first stop was the Bell Brown home, an abandoned nursing home well known in the area to bored teenagers looking for a late-night fright. To enter the property, you have to drive under a decrepit arched iron sign. Some letters on the sign have fallen off. Parts of others dangle and creak in the winter wind. It makes for an unnerving greeting. Linnell, Dusty, and I simultaneously gave one another a look as if to say, uh-oh, this place is freaky. What have we gotten ourselves into? Linnell's expression confirmed that we were about to meet some real live haints. It was in her eyes. First she made them real big and then squinted in pain. She held the squint for an awfully long while. It seems she's always being tormented by knowledge that folks aren't meant to have. Jeepers creepers, where did she get those peepers? Her look could put Bela Lugosi to shame, make Nosferatu run crying for his mummy. She gave me a serious case of the heebie-jeebies. But she can't help it. It's in her genes, and she considers it a scourge. Her paternal grandmother was a known witch who was observed incanting over rats before swinging them by their tails into the fire. I'm not related to the witch. Her son was the man my grandmother Meemaw ran off with to Florida. I think Linnell got a double dose of Granny's juju because her premonitions had been coming true for decades. When her brother Scooter was injured in a serious car wreck, Linnell saw every detail the night before and tried to warn him. She's also made many accurate predictions about illnesses and unexpected demises. We trust her completely. If she said werewolves were living in a catacomb under my house, I'd go straight to the store for silver bullets. As a young teen, I looked forward to spending weekends with her in Riverwall. Something scary happened every time. Black mists in the bedroom, a message scrawled on the bathroom mirror, objects moving. During one visit, she felt that her husband had been hurt, and she said we'd hear the ambulance any minute. The siren came in less than 1 minute later. Then a friend called to tell her he'd been in a minor car accident. That was a normal day for her. Linnell never envisions anything positive, never sees winning lottery numbers, cancer remissions, or who will win the Super Bowl. Instead, it's unrelenting bad news. She would gladly give up her ability, but can't. My aunt is no witch, just a beautiful, loving soul with a direct line to the dark side. We braced ourselves for what lay inside the Bell Brown home. Everybody except Mama, that is. Drawing on her billionth cigarette, she said we shouldn't be trespassing and that she'd stay in the car for when the police were called out on us. She was clearly aggravated by the whole shenanigans. We begged and pleaded with her to go in with us until she shot us her look. You're about to snap my last good nerve and I won't be responsible for what happens next look. At which point we shot up and got out of the car. The back door of the nursing home was wide open. The three of us approached it as if it was Satan's express elevator to eternal damnation. But we were excited too, and loving every edgy minute of it. It was perverse entertainment, on the verge of going wrong. We stuck so close to one another that I could feel Linnell's heart pounding. It's not a good sign when the head soothsayer is nutting up. And how was it that they'd slip behind me so that I was in front? Realizing how silly I was being, I let us inside. Within 2 seconds, a window slammed and crashed. Now we were scared out of our skulls and only 3 feet inside the door. We pressed on anyway. The back part of the place was the eeriest. It was a large room filled with a long row of twin beds set close together. One could imagine the old and dying languishing there, stick figures calling out in pain and confusion. Many of the beds were still perfectly made, despite a caved-in roof and years of plunder. A pair of dentures was intentionally set out at the foot of one bed, dentures that looked like they belonged to Paul Lynde. They smiled and mocked us. In the corner was evidence of a squatter. Linnell was overcome with the sadness all around her, her eyes filling with water. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "There's definitely something here." Dusty's eyes had become glazed, as if he'd been overtaken by something. The atmosphere was charged, crackling with the residual emotions and suffering of its former residents. The legend is that everybody left the Bell Brown home in the middle of the night, just up and left their belongings and vanished. As we walked through the other rooms, I could see why people thought that. Clothes still hung in the closets. A man's wallet, complete with ID cards, was on a table, and piles of business checks written by Miss Bell Brown herself were strewn across the floor. Things didn't add up. A decapitated baby doll head with one eyelid down, a single cowboy boot standing at attention in a doorway. One shoe, whether boot, slipper, or Manolo Blahnik, is always a terrible omen. Dusty said they were dead people. Well, photos of dead people in the kitchen, but they were not there on that day, thank goodness. He was probably talking about funeral pictures. Some rural Southerners treasure photos of their deceased loved ones. When Meemaw died, Mama took rolls of film of her in her casket, at least 21 close-ups of her face alone. Now, the longer we poked around the nursing home, the weirder it got. The skies were lonesome gray, but the contents of the room were bathed in panic color. An unnatural cast you see when your brain goes kaflooey, similar to when things switch into slow motion when you're in shock. Linnell reported that the presences were everywhere, shaking her head at things only she could see. The scourge of the veil. As if on cue, Dusty descended into catatonia, and I announced that it was time to leave. Despite Dusty's condition, he managed to leap in the car faster than a jackrabbit on crack. We all did. Mama, still worried that we were going to get caught, stomped on the gas pedal hard enough to burn rubber and jerk our necks. Linnell and I started telling her about our experiences. "We have to go back so that you can see what we're talking about," implored Linnell. "Yeah, Mama, you won't believe it. It's wild in there. Come on, you'd actually enjoy it." Mama restated her position against trespassing, but concurred that she would enjoy seeing the home. "But not for the reasons you think. I would just like to look around because it would be interesting, fascinating to see what's in there. And I'm not talking about ghosts either. I hate to tell you this, but y'all just got worked up over a whole bunch of nothing, you hear me? And if you're smart, you'll quit worrying about me going back there. I'd like to see it one day, but not without the owner's permission. And that's the end of that." Before going to our next supernatural location, we went to a Mexican restaurant to have lunch and decompress. I was concerned about Dusty. His dull gaze was fixed on something above my head. Had he been spirited away? Turned into a changeling? Or was he staring at an entity floating around up there? Just as I was wondering how to look up an exorcist in the phone book, I saw what was capturing his attention. A hot oil bikini contest on the wall-mounted TV behind me. During lunch, Aunt Linnell told us that she's had a vision of a gruesome car accident happening in front of her house. She's seen smoke and wreckage and blood-drenched victims laid out in her yard and is just waiting for it to occur. It hasn't happened yet, but we all know it will. Dusty claimed that our next destination was an old funeral home where coffins were stacked on the front porch. Admittedly, Southerners have used their porches in some funky ways, but I was keen to debunk this outrageous story. He had to be mistaken, didn't he? Mama got nervous again when she realized that the funeral home sat on a remote piece of private property, plastered with no trespassing signs. Dusty assured her that it was not far down the dirt road, but it turned out not to be close either. And it was perfectly hidden in an outcropping of trees and overgrowth. You'd have to know what you were looking for to find it. As we got closer, I could determine that it was a farmhouse from the late 1800s, in ruins. The floors no longer existed, but the outline of the structure was intact. Tenacious webs of kudzu enveloped it and held it together. The scene was pure, undisturbed Southern Gothic. Then we spied the big boxes on the porch. "See, I told you," said Dusty like a man vindicted. "Look, right there." He pointed out the name on one of the boxes, Private Herman N. Cooper. Above the name was stamped, Hadley Funeral Home. There were other such boxes on the porch as well. They must have been used to ship home the bodies of servicemen. I explained to Dusty that they weren't coffins, but the containers that held them. Despite the sight of the death containers and a funeral home straight out of a Rob Zombie flick, this place had none of the foreboding of the Bell Brown home. It was completely void of shadows. and a little bit of a letdown. By the time we left the farmhouse, it was getting late, and there was only one thing left to do before going home. Return to Belle Brown with Mama. We started in on her, nagging and needling her just to join us inside Dublin's most bone-chilling, ghost-infested hellhole. She got so agitated that she veered into oncoming traffic and nearly took out a construction barrel. Pulling over to regroup, she lit the billionth and sixth cigarette and made an announcement. All right, by God, we're going to the Belle Brown home. In the meantime, don't anybody say another darn word to me about it. And with that, she floorboarded it and whiplashed us all the way there. Before we go in, I have just one question. Why exactly are we looking for something we don't want to find? No, seriously, can someone please tell me why we're hunting ghosts when we hope to God we don't find any? Mama, ever the pithy observer, made us bust out laughing. Then she led the expedition inside in her usual no-nonsense manner. She began by belting out, "Hello? Hello? If anyone is here, we mean you no harm. We mean you no harm." With a voice that can strip paint off steel girders, Mama must have thought the phantoms were hard of hearing. The screeching of, "We mean you no harm," continued, although she occasionally alternated it with a pleasant sing-song version of, "We mean you no harm, harm." Apparently it banished the evil forces because I noticed that the birds were singing again and the panic color had drained out of everything. Mama strolled through the room like she was at an exhibit. "Oh, look at that doll's head over there." I bet it was a comfort to someone. Now that's a shame that the mate of that cowboy boot is missing because somebody would get $5 for those boots at the flea market. They're nice boots. On and on she went, interpreting the home and its contents with clear eyes and total fearlessness. We were baffled at how different the place was this time. Mama, who is a match for any hate, made us see the Belle Brown as it really was instead of how our imaginations made it. Honey, the dead ones can't do anything to you. It's the live ones you gotta worry about. Aunt Linnell may have the second sight, but Mama has a special talent for seeing things. Happy birthday, Miss Sybil.
Oh, wow, that was good.